Vamos a iniciar esta conferencia con el doctor Mel Ainscow. Debo decirles que es un privilegio tenerlo entre nosotros. Ustedes se imaginarán lo complejo de su agenda para hacerla coincidir en un evento, en un lugar, en una ciudad, pues prácticamente del otro lado del Atlántico. Así que a Mel Ainscow le damos un aplauso de bienvenida, por favor. Y debo de comentar que Mel ha trabajado incansablemente en el tema de la educación inclusiva. Él es profesor emérito de educación y codirector del Centro para la Equidad en la Educación. Es profesor también de la Universidad Tecnológica de Queensland. Entre el 2007 y el 2011 fue el principal asesor del gobierno para el Greater Manchester Challenge, una iniciativa de 50 millones de libras para mejorar los resultados educativos para todos los jóvenes de la región. El doctor Ainscow ha sido consultor de organizaciones internacionales tan importantes como la UNESCO, la UNICEF, la organización Save the Children. Ha recibido honores y condecoraciones tanto en su país como en otros lugares, y debo también de comentarles que ha participado en dos grandes proyectos para UNESCO, dos grandes documentos que seguramente estarán pronto cerca de nosotros. Uno de ellos es Reaching Out to All Learners, que ha sido una contribución para los profesores y las profesoras que desean aprender, incorporar este paradigma de la educación inclusiva. También la última publicación en el cual el doctor Ainscow colaboró al lado de otros expertos de diferentes partes del mundo es la guía para asegurar la inclusión y la equidad en educación. Me da mucho gusto que podamos escuchar las ideas, la experiencia, las aportaciones que el doctor Ainscow tiene que compartir con nosotros, y nuevamente yo les pido un fuerte aplauso de bienvenida. Muchas gracias, Mel. Bienvenido.
Okay, well, good afternoon again. It's nice to be with you. When I go home to England, my son and daughter will be saying to me, "What do you do in Mexico?" And I will say to them, I had my photograph taken with hundreds of beautiful women and some handsome men as well. So it's very nice to be so welcomed here. In what I'm going to talk about, I want to describe what's happening internationally to give you a sense of international trends, and in that way, I hope you will be able to think about your own work and where you are going. So I've called the talk Diversity and Equity in Education, the education global perspective, if you like. Since 1990, the United Nations organizations have had a massive campaign which they call Education for All. And I like that phrase, education for all. It's simple, it's clear, and it's what we're all here for, to make sure that every child has a chance to have good quality education. So since 1990, the United Nations has been pushing countries to invest in education, to invest in teachers, to make sure that we have good quality education all over the world. It's a big struggle, and there has been progress. But the current estimate is that something like 60 million children around the world do not receive any education at all. They never go in a classroom, they never meet a teacher, because in the parts of the world where they live, there are no teachers, and there are no schools. So this is the big push internationally, to provide education for all particularly in those countries where there are not enough schools and not enough teachers. I'm going to start with a story to illustrate this. Oops. This is a photograph taken in Mumbai, a large city in India. For those of you who can't see the picture, it's a picture of a group of very young children standing outside a very simple, primitive building. I think the children are aged around about 3 years of age. Until this picture was taken, these children were part of the 60 million. They live in very primitive conditions on a big estate of homemade buildings where there is no running water, where there is no electricity. In parts of Latin America, certainly in Brazil, this would be called a favela. Very simple, primitive housing. And there was no school, and there was no teacher. And a committee was formed of parents. Actually, they were all mothers. And this group of mothers decided that their children would have education. So they formed a committee. They had help from a charity. They collected some money, not very much. They got together some materials, and they built their own classroom. And this simple building that you can see, which certainly doesn't look like a classroom of the sort we would have in the United Kingdom, this simple building is their classroom. And you see the children standing outside, pleased to be going to school for the first time. And in the shadows of the photograph, there are two women. One of the women is the chair of the committee that built the classroom, and the other woman is the new teacher who has been sent to the school by the local government. Now, the reason I want to give you this story is because it has, for me, the most important message in what I'm going to say this afternoon. So if you listen to nothing else, I want you to listen to this. My view from lots of experiences in many different parts of the world is that if we want to have education for all, it is about people working together to make it happen. If these very poor mothers in Mumbai can get together and create education for all of their children, then the challenge to the rest of us, whether we're in Europe or here in Mexico, is to do what we can to make it happen. But we have to do that together. It requires collaborative action. So the central message that I want you to think about is the most important thing is the collective will to make it happen. We want to make it happen, and we will do it together. So I want you to keep that message in mind. Since 1990, there's been a series of activities internationally. Of course, there have been conferences, been investment in different countries around the world, and that is what has led to the progress. During that period, the phrase education for all has continued to be a matter of debate. And some of us, during that period, have had the view that sometimes education for all means education for almost all, nearly all, because there are some children who can't be educated, who can't be included. So the phrase education for all, for people like me, has been a kind of area of concern. Now that is why today is so important. This last 12 months, the United Nations organizations, particularly UNESCO, have made a statement to say that from now on, education for all will be all. And they have contained this in a new declaration, which is called Education 2030, with a series of sustainable development goals, and the important one for us here in relation to education is Sustainable Development Goal number 4, and this extract is from that development goal, and my friend will read it to you. So it's about overcoming exclusion, children who are left out, marginalization, children who are there in the school but are not really included. It's about improving access, participation, and learning outcomes. It's not just being there, it's being there and learning. And the statement goes on to say, sorry, having a problem. Can I go back one? Can you read that for me, please, Efren? Sorry. Yeah. So the push now is to reach every child. As Umberto said earlier, every child matters and every child matters equally. Now, when we start to think about that, we begin to think about who are the children who are excluded? Who are the children who are marginalized? It may be different in different parts of the world. In some parts of the world, certainly in Africa, often it is girls who are marginalized or excluded. In my country, it isn't about girls. Sometimes in my country, it's about boys, particularly boys from very poor, disadvantaged backgrounds. And the issue of poverty, children from poor homes, is a constant part of all of this. It's usually, in most parts of the world, children from the poorest homes who are likely to be left out. But you will know in terms of your own communities, who are the children who are at risk? Who are the children that we need to pay more attention to? In 2008, UNESCO held a big conference in Geneva, in Switzerland, for all the ministers of education from around the world. They all came together, and the conference was called Inclusive Education, the Way of the Future. And the conference was an attempt to say to the ministers, you have to pay attention to your policies and your resources and to make sure that every child has a chance to be included. As part of the preparation for that conference, I was with a group of people who developed a series of TV programs to present to the ministers. And the TV programs were made in different countries, and they included children talking to the ministers, saying what they thought was important about education. I thought it would be good for you just to get a flavor of this TV program. You can find them on the UNESCO website. They're all on the UNESCO website. The short extract we're going to look at is in English, but it has Spanish subtitles at the bottom of the screen. Can we play the video, please?
Queria dizer para os ministros de todo mundo.
I would like to ask them.
ministros de todo mundo.
I would like to ask the ministers to do something for the children
Assim, tomasse uma decisão para tirarem
so that they're not hanging around on the streets anymore
Speed, okay.
colocassem elas numa
and so that they can be allowed to go to school,
para dia elas serem
so that they can have a future
e ser aquilo que elas
and make their
são.
dreams come true. At school, I help the others because I know all of the subjects. At home, I help my sisters with their homework because I've already done the classes that they are doing. I help each of them equally. There are no favorites because I love them all, and so I don't treat them differently. In the past 10 years, 28 million children have been enrolled in school. Yet still today, some 75 million children do not have access to education. In sub-Saharan Africa and South and West Asia, as well as in the Arab states, girls are the ones who are most often excluded from the education system. Why are these children not in school? Firstly, because in Latin America and the Caribbean, and in South and West Asia and the Pacific, late entry is the problem. In sub-Saharan Africa, access to school is the principal concern. In South and West Asia, there are high rates of dropouts. There are glaring gaps in achievement between developed and developing countries. The scope of exclusion is vast. Inclusive education targets all children who are excluded from education, regardless of their origin. Out of 776 million adults who are lacking basic literacy skills, 2/3 of them are women. More than 90% of children with disabilities in developing countries do not attend school. In 2025, the number of people with disabilities will increase from 650 to 900 million. 2/3 of these will be in developing countries. It will cost $11 billion per year to finance just 3 of the EFA goals in low-income countries: primary school for all, early childhood care and education, and literacy. Yet we spend 75 times this amount per year on military expenditure. 3 days of peace in the world would give all of the children in the world basic primary education. One of the ways to address this situation is through inclusive education. Inclusive education is a pedagogy for all.
The definition that I would suggest is the most valuable one is to think about inclusion as a process of school development. Moving a school forward, developing its capacity to involve all children. It involves 3 overlapping levels. The first level is presence. Which children are here? Which children attend every day? Presence is the first stage of inclusion. It's necessary, but insufficient. Beyond presence, we also have to have children who feel valued and welcomed, children who feel that they can participate. So presence and participation is very important. But even that is insufficient, because children can be present, they can be participating, but they may not be learning. So the ultimate goal of inclusion is, of course, learning and achievement. Okay. If you want to look at that video, and there's a lot more videos, if you go to the UNESCO website and Google Inclusive Education from this 2008 conference, you can download all the videos, and there are stories from different parts of the world. In that video, towards the end, I talked about the importance of clarity of meaning. What we're talking about here this afternoon, colleagues, is radical. It's not simply about helping a few children who are excluded to be in the school. It's about changing the way the system works, changing the way schools work. It's a radical program of transformation, and it is extremely difficult to achieve anywhere in the world. It's a really challenging change. People in education, people in schools are very busy. The work is very intensive. There's not a lot of time to think and talk and plan. So if we're talking about a really radical change, we have to be clear about what we're trying to achieve. Now, if I trace thinking over the last 20 years or so, I see a series of changes in thinking. And I'm going to try to summarize them through these cartoons that you can see. And as I describe them, I want you to think about, where am I? What stage of thinking am I about the idea of inclusion? The pictures, there are 3 pictures of 3 children watching a baseball game, a sports game. In the first picture, it says in English, "It is assumed that everyone will benefit from the same kind of support. Therefore, the children are all being treated equally." But as you see, one child is very tall. He can see over the fence. The second child is not so tall, but he can just about see over the fence. The third child is quite short. He can't see the game at all. So, if we're treating children equally, which I'm saying is important, it will mean that some children will find it difficult to be involved in what is happening, whether it's a baseball game or whether it's your classroom. So in the second cartoon, we have the same 3 children watching the baseball game, and it says the individuals are given different support to make it possible for them all to have equal access to the game. They are being treated equitably. And in the picture, the tall child can see, the medium-sized child has a box so he can stand on it, and now he can see, and importantly, the short child, the little boy, he has 2 boxes, so he can see the game as well. So in this case, the children are being treated equally, but they are being different levels of support. Now, I think in many countries, that's the stage we're at in our thinking. We do try to treat everybody equally. We do believe every child is equally important, but we know that each child requires different support. And so we move to the third position, which is where I think globally we are moving. And this is the radical position and the difficult position. The same situation, the 3 boys watching the game, but this time the fence that was acting as a barrier to the 3 children has been taken away. And it's been replaced by a different kind of fencing where all 3 children can see through. Now, I think the key concept in all of this is the idea of barriers. What are the barriers that make it difficult for some children to take part in what we're offering in our schools? Some of you I know are familiar with the Index for Inclusion, an instrument that we developed in the United Kingdom and has now been used all over the world. And one of the key ideas of the index is it helps people within a school to look at what they do and to ask questions. What we're doing, what are the good things we're doing? We can build on those. But what is it that we do that creates a barrier for some of our children? Now, barrier is a metaphor. It can be a physical barrier, as in the cartoon, a fence that needs to be replaced. But often the more difficult barriers are the hidden ones. The barrier that is created by a curriculum that is not appropriate. The barrier that is created by an assessment system that doesn't celebrate the progress of all the children. And possibly the most difficult barriers, the barriers in our minds. The limitations of our own imaginations to what is possible. Those barriers are more difficult to see and find and more difficult to overcome because they're about beliefs and attitudes. So that is why I'm saying The move towards inclusive education requires radical changes within the education system. What do we know then about system-level change? The phrase at the top of the slide in English talks about system-level change. Well, what we know is that as far as education policy is concerned, policy is made at all levels of the system. Now, politicians find this very difficult to understand. I didn't talk about this to the Secretary of State last night. Maybe I should have done. Politicians, and I work with lots of politicians in different countries, they believe that if they make a policy in the Parliament and they issue it, then everything will change. But education systems are very difficult to change because you have people at different levels who interpret and make sense of what a policy is saying. And of course, this is the most important thing. The most important policymakers, as far as education is concerned, are the teachers in the classroom. Once the teacher goes into her classroom and closes the door, for the next hour or 2 hours, policy is what the teacher decides to do. So if we're to change education and make it more inclusive, we need governments who say the right things, and the Secretary of Education today said many really very good things, so we need that. But then we need other players, other participants, to believe in the idea and to want to make it happen, especially those of you who are teachers or are going to be teachers. You, as far as the children are concerned, are the policymakers. Your attitudes, your beliefs, your skills, or maybe lack of skills, are going to be crucial. What we also know from lots of research, therefore, changing education systems is technically quite simple. It's reasonably easy to say, what do you do to make a school inclusive? I'm sure we'll be able to come up with some good ideas if we had time here this afternoon. That's not the problem. Deciding what to do is relatively easy. Getting everybody to do it together, to pull in the same direction, is the challenge. That's why leadership, particularly at the school level, is very, very important. So if we're to achieve these changes, which are socially complex, then we have to have a clarity of purpose. We have to be clear what we're trying to do. And what we also know from research is that as well as being clear about what we want to do, we need some evidence to ask questions about where are we at the moment, what are the next steps, where are we going to try to go. Over a lot of years, I've been fortunate to work with schools, with groups of schools, with education systems, to try to work out what do we do to make education more inclusive? How do we move in a more inclusive direction? I got an idea from something I read many years ago, which talked about the need for levers for change. A lever, if you think about it, is something you pull to move a heavy object. So a good lever is something that you don't have to pull too hard and it will move the heavy object. So my experience suggests to me that if we're to move education in an inclusive direction, we need to understand what are the levers for change, what we need to do to move the system forward. I've tried to understand that in relation to this diagram. Inclusion and equity in education, what are the levers for change? It's a diagram which has 5 sections and they interconnect. In the middle of it is the school. And by that I mean the local neighborhood school where the majority of children attend. And I'm suggesting if we're to move education systems in a more inclusive direction, we have to develop neighborhood schools. So on the diagram, I talk about reviewing and developing the school. And that's what the Index of Inclusion provides, a framework to help people in schools to carry out that review. At the heart of that, as I've stressed already, is the teacher in the classroom. So if we're to improve the capacity of a school to educate all of its children, we have to invest in the professional learning of teachers. I've worked with lots of schools that have made progress. The one you saw briefly in the video is an example. It's a primary school in Manchester. It's an outstanding school. It's recognized so by its inspectors. It's recognized so with its test results, which are exceptionally good. But it is a school that will accept any child, whatever their background, whatever their language, children with disabilities, children from minority groups. It is genuinely a school that is committed to being inclusive. The progress that has been made there has because of the investment that has been placed in developing the professional thinking and practice of the teachers. The school has a strong program of in-service professional development. That is not about sending people on courses at the university or in the local authority. They do that as well. It is professional development that goes on within the school, with teachers working in teams, sharing ideas, planning together. Most importantly, occasionally seeing one another teaching so that they are learning from one another. And the senior leaders in that school believe something that I think is fundamental. If you want to improve the learning of children, you have to invest in the learning of teachers. But I stress again, I'm not talking about going on courses, although I think that's a good idea as well. I am talking about professional development that goes on in the school, and of course, it doesn't happen by chance, it has to be led. So the role of senior people in the school is very important to all of that. I could say more of that, about that, but I'll leave it for the moment. All of that, of course, is in a system. Schools don't live in isolation. And if a school tries to do something different, and it doesn't fit with the things that are going on around it, the school is likely to get into difficulty. So, for example, on the left-hand side of my diagram, there is local administration, the local authority, the local education department. If the people in that department are not committed to the idea of the school becoming inclusive, then it's going to be difficult for the school. That can create a barrier. So we have to take the local authority with us. On the other side of the diagram, an even larger set of potential barriers, the wider community, the parents, local businesses, local social and religious organizations. If they are not committed to inclusive education, then they will also create barriers. See, what I'm suggesting is that by becoming more inclusive, a school is likely to become better for all of its pupils. The investment in the practice of teachers will not just help the school to be able to integrate children who previously have been marginalized or excluded, it will also benefit all of the children. Now, I don't know what you think about that. See, if I went out into the street in my hometown and I said to some people, we're going to try to improve the school that your children go to so that we can include children who need a lot more support. And I'll say to them, and I think it will be better for your children as well. Many parents would say, I don't understand that. If we're going to give a lot more attention to children who need more support, that will disadvantage the majority. That is not my experience. When a school moves in an inclusive direction, it becomes a better place for everybody, for all the children and indeed for all the staff of the school. But we have to convince people that's right. You see why I keep saying this is radical. It requires changes of beliefs and attitudes in the school, in the local authority, in government, and in the wider community, including, of course, families and parents. So the search for levers for change point to two interconnected things. At the top of the diagram, there's the question of definition. What are the principles that guide the development of an education system? Are the principles really committed to every child mattering, every child being of equal importance? And then down at the bottom of the diagram, the other source of leverage, the other source of encouragement is the collection of evidence through statistics, but also through the collection of intelligence and qualitative information. I describe this as being a move in a new direction, if you will, an inclusive turn. It involved clarity of meaning. Do we all understand where we're trying to go? We want to become more inclusive. We want to be more equitable. Do the teachers understand? Do the children understand? Because their voices is important too. Do the parents understand? Do the wider community understand? And then in order to inject some pace, movement into all of this, I'm suggesting that the collection of evidence. Now, the collection of evidence can be, as I've said, about statistics. Certainly in my country, we have a national program of inspection. Schools are inspected very regularly. And the inspection reports are published in the newspaper, on the internet. It's a very powerful lever for change. The problem we have in my country is that the framework for inspection is still not there. It's still not about inclusion and equity. So it creates a barrier. But it is a powerful lever. So inspection and monitoring can help to pull the system and pull schools in a more inclusive direction. I describe this as taking an inclusive turn. That's what the phrase in English says on the slide. Taking an inclusive turn. We are going in a new direction. This is not about putting special education into the regular school. I'll stop and let you think about that. It is not about putting special education into the regular school. It is about reforming the regular school. It's about working with other people and working together to reform the way the school works, to change its curriculum, to change relationships, to change organization. It's that third cartoon, taking the fence down, removing the barriers. It requires collaboration. Just like my school in India, it needs people to work together. And it requires leadership. And those of you who are in senior positions, I've met already this afternoon a number of people in the room who are school principals. You have a crucial role in providing the leadership. It is not about putting special education in the mainstream. But special education has an important role to play. Joining the collaboration, bringing your expertise alongside other expertise to see if we can make schools effective for all of the children. I keep saying, it's radical. It challenges all of us to think about our thinking, to think about our work, to question whether what we're doing is part of the problem or part of the solution. Where am I? To help with this, clarity of meaning is crucial. And I want to suggest some elements of the meaning that I think would be most helpful based on lots of experiences in different places. I want you to think, what is your definition of inclusion or inclusion in education or inclusive education? What is your definition? Everybody in the room will have one. That's why you came to the conference. I'm suggesting that your definition may need changing to come to this new thinking. But you may not agree with me. I'm not here to brainwash you, although I am trying. I'm not here to brainwash you. I'm here to make you think, and to make me think as well, really. So these are the elements of the definition that I think are most helpful. Inclusion as a process. Take that one off. Inclusion as a process. If you will, a journey. Building on what we've got at the moment and saying what are the next step. The logic of this, which again is rather challenging, is that probably there is never going to be an inclusive school. It's impossible. Logically, it's impossible. Children are too clever. Children will always come up with new challenges, new problems, things we've not met before. So if you went with me to that school in the video and you said to the teachers there, "Are you an inclusive school?" they would say, "Not really. We believe in the idea. We're trying to go in that direction. But every year, new children come along and they bring new challenges." So inclusion is a journey. It's a process. Continually looking for new ways of responding to children who are bringing new challenges. So we're never going to get there. That's the reality of it. It is, as I've already stressed, about identifying and removing barriers. Now, can I underline something very important here? When we introduced the idea of barriers many years ago as part of the index, in some of the schools that I went into that were using the index, not just in the United Kingdom, but in other countries, I began to realize that people had interpreted it in a different way to me. They were saying, what are the barriers that this child has? In other words, what are the weaknesses? What are the deficits? What's missing in this child? That's the old thinking of special education. I'm part of that. I'm a very old part of special education. I was a teacher and a head teacher in a special school. And my preoccupation was, what is wrong with this child so we can fix him or her? Barriers is not about what the child brings, it's about the context that we create. Does this context help every child? And if not, what can we do to change it? It's therefore, as you heard me say quickly on the video, about 3 levels, or 3 stages maybe. It's about presence, being there. You can't be included if you're not in the school or not in the classroom, so you've got to be there. So the first goal is to get all the children into school, into the classroom, and hopefully to keep them there as well. But you can be present and ignored and overlooked. So being present is the first step, but it is insufficient. So the second stage is participation. Not only are you there in the classroom, but you're taking part in the activities. You're joining in. Your name is used. You are recognized as being an important part of our classroom community. So it's being present and it's participating. But in my view, even that is insufficient. You could be present, you could be participating, but you might not be learning anything that's of any use to you. So the ultimate goal of inclusive education is learning and achievement. It's what governments are talking about when they talk about raising standards. I have no problem with that. When I meet with government people, I say, I believe in raising standards, but it's got to be standards for all the children, not just some of the children. That's why it's so challenging. That's why it requires reform. So it's the presence, participation, and achievement. And it is therefore about all students. It's about all students. In some of the schools I've worked with over recent years, teachers have said, you know, in my classroom, there are some students who are invisible. I say, what do you mean, invisible? They say, well, they're there, they come every day, they do their work, but really, they're not really part of the classroom community. And sometimes when we watch lessons, as I do, you'll realize that some children, their names are never used. They're in the classroom, they're behaving nicely, they're doing the work, but they're sort of silently getting on. So we have to be watching out for invisible children. Children who are not on the radar, children who are not on the list that you keep in school to say these are children who are at risk. These are children who are just being overlooked. Right? So it's about all children. In some ways, in my mind, being a bit of a romantic, I think that's enough. I want to stop there. But in an unfair world of the sort that we are living in, working in, we have to be pragmatic. And so we do have to watch out for those children who we know from experience, possibly also from statistics, are most at risk. But we need to watch out because we can easily jump to conclusions. Often, for example, there's an assumption that if a child has an impairment of some kind, he is necessarily or she is necessarily at risk. But that child may be getting on perfectly well, being present, participating, and achievement. So we have to have an open mind, and we have to be collecting evidence and keep an eye on things and keeping an eye on the progress of all children. It is then about marginalization, exclusion, and underachievement. It's about all three things. All of that provides the framework for collecting evidence. In schools that are becoming more inclusive, they are constantly monitoring the progress of the children. They do that in the normal ways, giving the children tests, assessing their work, but also by watching children's reaction in the classroom. Very skillful, inclusive teachers are incredibly clever at monitoring every member of their class. I always think that very good teachers are like jazz musicians. They're like jazz musicians. You know, in jazz, the professional musician, they practice their instrument, they learn their repertoire of songs, but every time they play the song, it's different. They call it improvisation. Now, what strikes me about very good teachers is they are improvisers. They plan the lesson, they know what they're going to do, but they know that things are going to go wrong. They know there's going to be unexpected reactions from the children. So constantly their eyes are open and they're watching and they're listening and they're watching out for those children who are feeling they're not being included, who are not making sense of the activity. It's an incredibly demanding job. People who are not teachers, often in my experience, I don't know whether you have experienced this, people who are not teachers find it difficult to understand why teachers are always saying they're tired. Now, I think I know why teachers are tired. But people who have not been teachers say, well, you have this lovely job. You've got a short day. You have really long holidays, and you're surrounded by all these lovely, smiling children. Why are you tired? Well, this is my theory about why teachers are tired. It's physically demanding. You're on your feet, you're moving around, you're collecting things, you're giving things out. It's physically demanding right through the day. It's emotionally demanding. You've got these people who are putting emotional demands upon you all the time. I'm talking about the school director and the deputy director, right? These people are making policy decisions and putting you under pressure. But most importantly, because of this process of improvisation, teaching is intellectually tiring. You go in the room with your plan, but you know that there are 30 other plans in the room. And if your plan doesn't fit with those 30 plans, or maybe it's 40 plans, then you're in difficulty. So you're constantly thinking on your feet, changing, adjusting. Why is that child looking so bored? Why is that child asleep? Why is this child being naughty? You're constantly making decisions, and most of the time you do that on your own. There's nobody else you can ask advice from. You have to make those decisions. It is very, very tiring, really. So that's why I'm saying the professional development of teachers is at the heart of the Inclusive Education Project. It has to go on in the schools. It has to include opportunities to see other teachers' work. It has to include opportunities to talk about teaching so that you can develop a language of practice, to share ideas and to think aloud. And it has to be planned, and it has an important role, therefore, for senior people in making that happen. All the schools that I've seen that have made significant progress in relation to the inclusion of children have invested in the professional learning of teachers. I've almost finished. If you're interested in that, and you want to take it forward, then there are lots of resources that you can draw on, including the Index for Inclusion, which is available in the Spanish language. The International Bureau of Education, which is a wing of UNESCO, has recently produced a resource pack. I was part of the group that developed it, which is called Reaching Out to All Learners. It will shortly be available in Spanish. It isn't quite yet. But you can get the English copy, you can download it from the website at the bottom of all there. It's a resource pack of materials to create professional development in the school. It's meant to stimulate professional development. It has stories, accounts, examples, ideas as to how professional learning can be created in the school. And when we called it Reaching Out to All Learners, we adopted that phrase deliberately. Because what we're saying, in an inclusive school, everybody is a learner, not just the children, but also the adults. So the reaching out, like a tree, is reaching out to everybody in the school, and indeed everybody in the school community and its wider community, not least parents and families, reaching out to all learners. So the central message, some people arrived a little late, so they missed the central message, so I'll finish by reminding you all of what it is. I'm saying that the most important thing is collaboration, working together with other people, inventing new strategies to reach the children we're not reaching. And therefore, it's a social process. It's a social process of learning, and the most significant factor in my experience has been the collective will to make it happen. Thank you for listening.
¿Qué les pareció? Abre diálogo, abre nuevas líneas de investigación y promueve este gran esfuerzo de pensar, planear y diseñar acciones de una educación de calidad para todos. Nuevamente un fuerte aplauso para el doctor Mel Ainscow. Y con esta emoción, con esta buen aplauso cálido como es el clima de Monterrey, la comunidad educativa de la Escuela Normal de Especialización desean otorgar este sencillo reconocimiento al doctor Mel Ainscow por su destacada participación en este Congreso Internacional de Educación Inclusiva, un horizonte de posibilidades. Mel Ainscow, this recognition is for you. Thank you very much. No omito comentar que el doctor Mel Ainscow tiene una segunda participación. Para los que se inscribieron, bienvenidos, y los que no se inscribieron, está cerrado. Es el próximo jueves, es un diálogo, prepárense, porque habrá oportunidad de expresar preguntas, comentarios e intercambiar toda una serie de aspectos. Hay que aprovechar, todos los diálogos llevan precisamente esta cercanía y este propósito. Nos preparamos para la siguiente. Yo espero que en su programa de congreso aparezca una tercera participación. ¿Es correcto? Correcto, muy bien. Nos preparamos para recibir al doctor Eric Tridas. Es una excelente profesional,